The millionaire ordered in German, solely to humiliate her. The waitress smiled silently. What he didn't know was that she spoke 7 languages, and one of them would change her life forever. The Gilded Hearth restaurant gleamed with opulent splendor. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like artificial constellations, casting sparkles on white silk tablecloths and polished silver cutlery. It was the kind of place where the powerful came to celebrate their power, where money spoke louder than words, and where people like Ilara Hayes were invisible. Ilara walked between the tables, the tray perfectly balanced on her right hand. She had been working there for months, always with the same routine: arrive early, clean, serve, smile, and go home with aching feet and her pride intact, because that was the only thing no one could take from her, her pride. That night, the restaurant was especially full. Business moguls, politicians, local celebrities, all laughing, toasting, completely ignoring those who served them as if they were ghosts in aprons. Ilara paused for a moment near the kitchen, breathing deeply. Chef Arthur Peterson observed her from his station, noticing something in her expression. "Are you all right, kiddo?" he asked with that deep voice that always sounded like a hug. "Yes, chef. It's just a long night. All nights are long when you work for people who think money makes them better than you." Arthur wiped his hands on his apron. "But remember what I always say, dignity has no price, and you have more dignity in one finger than all of them combined in their bank accounts." Ilara smiled slightly. Arthur was one of the few who treated her like a person in that place. The others, including some colleagues, saw her as the quiet girl who never complained, who accepted miserable tips and disdainful looks without a word. What no one knew was why she kept silent. What no one imagined was what she hid behind those dark eyes that observed everything with an intensity few noticed. The main door opened with that particular sound that announced the arrival of someone important. Ilara instinctively turned and saw 2 men enter. The first was older, with perfectly combed gray hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ilara's annual salary. He walked with the natural arrogance of those who have never had to worry about anything in life. The second was younger, perhaps in his late 30s, with the air of an heir who knows the world belongs to him by right of birth. Both laughed at something as the restaurant manager practically ran towards them. "Mr. Albright, what an honor to have you with us tonight. Your favorite table is ready." Maxwell Albright. Ilara had heard that name many times. He owned a chain of luxury restaurants across the region, invested in real estate, and, according to rumors, was a man who enjoyed humiliating those he considered inferior, which, by his criteria, was basically everyone. "Sophia." The manager approached Ilara with a tense expression. "I need you to take table 7. It's the Albrights. Table 7, but Marcos always serves that one. Marcos is busy, and they just arrived. Go now." Ilara felt a knot forming in her stomach but nodded without protesting. It was her job, and she needed that job more than anyone in that restaurant could imagine. She approached the table where the 2 men were already seated, still laughing at some private joke. When Ilara arrived, neither of them looked at her. It was as if she were part of the furniture. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Hearth. My name is Ilara, and I will be your waitress tonight. May I begin by offering you something to drink?" Maxwell finally looked up, but not to meet her eyes. He scanned her from top to bottom with that look. Ilara knew too well, the look that evaluated, that judged, that dismissed in seconds. "Look, Richard," he said to the younger man, his son, Ilara recalled. "How kind of them to send us the prettiest one." Richard let out a chuckle. "Though she probably can't even read the menu, right, father?" Both laughed. Ilara maintained her professional smile, though inside she felt as if nails were being driven into her chest. She had learned to endure this kind of comment. She had learned that responding only made things worse. "What would you like to drink?" she repeated in a calm voice. Maxwell picked up the menu and pretended to study it with exaggerated attention. Then he looked at his son with a smile that boded no good. "You know, Richard, I haven't had fun in a while. This girl looks like the type who barely graduated high school. I bet she doesn't know anything beyond 'Here you go, sir, and thank you for the tip.'" "Father, don't be cruel," Richard said with false compassion. "She surely knows how to count. How else would she figure out the tips we never give her?" More laughter. Ilara squeezed the pen in her hand so hard that her knuckles turned white, but her face remained impassive. And then Maxwell did something that would change everything. He leaned forward with that predatory smile he used in million-dollar negotiations and began to speak in German. Not just any German, formal, technical, deliberately complex German. "Ich möchte eine Flasche von eurem teuersten Wein bestellen, aber ich bezweifle, dass dieses arme Mädchen überhaupt versteht, was ich sage. Wahrscheinlich denkt sie, ich spreche Chinesisch. Elara clearly heard every word, every derogatory nuance. He had said that he wanted a bottle of the most expensive wine, but doubted that this poor girl understood what he was saying. He probably thought she was speaking Chinese. Richard burst out laughing, slapping the table with his palm. Father, you're terrible. Look at her face. She has no idea what you said. Of course not. Maxwell leaned back in his chair, visibly pleased with himself. These people barely know English. German, please. You'd need a real education for that. One she clearly never had. Elara remained motionless. Her heart pounded, but not from shame. It was something different, something she had learned to control during years of practice, because Elara had understood every word, every insult disguised as a foreign language, but she said nothing. Not yet. See? Maxwell pointed at her as if she were a specimen under study. She doesn't even blink. She's probably thinking about what reality TV show she'll watch when she gets to her dingy apartment. Elara took a deep breath. Her grandmother's words resonated in her mind like an echo from the past. True power isn't about showing what you know, but knowing when to show it. Grandma Eleanor, her grandmother, the woman who had taught her everything she knew, the woman who for decades had worked as a translator for embassies, but had never received official recognition because she didn't have university degrees. The woman who spoke 9 languages fluently and had passed down that gift to Elara since she was a child. 7 languages. Elara spoke 7 languages fluently: German, French, Portuguese, Italian, Mandarin, Spanish, and, of course, English. Each one learned in her grandmother's kitchen, on long nights, listening to recordings, in the worn books her grandmother guarded like treasures. But no one knew because Elara had learned that in a world that judged by appearances, showing her cards too soon was a fatal mistake. Well, Maxwell switched to English with a bored expression. Since it's obvious you don't understand anything useful, I'll tell you simply. Bring us a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2005, and make sure it's at the correct temperature, if they even know what that means here. Of course, sir. I'll be right back. Elara withdrew with measured steps, her mind processing everything that had just happened. It wasn't the first time she had been humiliated. It wouldn't be the last. But something in the deliberate cruelty of that man, in his need to feel superior by using a language he believed she didn't understand, ignited something within her. In the kitchen, Arthur awaited her with a worried expression. I saw your face when you came back. What did those guys do to you? Nothing I haven't heard before. Elara, you don't have to put up with this. There are other jobs. There are no other jobs that pay enough for my grandmother's medicine, chef. You know that. Arthur sighed. He knew Elara's situation. He knew her grandmother was sick, that medical bills were piling up, that Elara worked double shifts to survive. What did they say to you? Elara hesitated for a moment. The older one spoke in German. He thought I wouldn't understand. He said horrible things about me. Arthur's eyes widened. And you? I understood every word. A heavy silence fell between them. Arthur knew some things about Elara that others didn't. He knew she was different, special in some way she never fully explained. What are you going to do? Elara took the wine bottle Maxwell had ordered and placed it on the tray. For now, my job. After that, we'll see. She returned to the table with the bottle, showing it to Maxwell as protocols dictated. He barely looked at her, making a dismissive gesture with his hand for her to pour. As Elara poured the wine with perfect precision, Maxwell spoke to his son again in German. Sieh dir ihre Hände an. Rau und abgenutzt. Das ist das Leben der Unterschicht. Arbeiten bis sie sterben, ohne jemals etwas Wichtiges zu erreichen. He was commenting on Elara's hands, saying they were rough and worn, that was the life of the lower class, working until they died without achieving anything important. Richard nodded, adding in the same language, Wenigstens hat sie ein hübsches Gesicht. Wahrscheinlich das einzige, was sie am Leben hat. At least she has a pretty face. Probably the only thing she has in life. Elara finished serving, maintaining her neutral expression, but inside, something was changing. A decision was forming, one she had avoided for years, but which now seemed inevitable. Would you like to order dinner? She asked in perfect English. Bring the best you have. Maxwell didn't even look at the menu, and I hope it's really the best. I know the owners of this place. One mistake, and you're out of a job. Understood, sir. Elara withdrew again, but this time she stopped in a corner of the restaurant where she could observe the table without being seen. The Albrights continued laughing, speaking in German about business, about people they had destroyed, about employees they had fired for fun. And then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Maxwell mentioned the name of a hospital, St. Jude's Hospital, the same hospital where her grandmother was being treated. He spoke about an investment he was considering, about how he planned to buy part of the hospital and optimize costs, which in his language meant cutting services for patients who couldn't afford luxury treatments. Die Alten und Kranken, die sich keine Privatversicherung leisten können, sind sowieso eine Last für das System. Wenn wir das Unternehmen übernehmen, werden wir unrentable Abteilungen schließen. The old and sick who can't afford private insurance are a burden on the system anyway. When we take control, we'll close those unprofitable departments. Ilara felt the world stop. Her grandmother depended on that hospital, on those non-profitable departments that this man wanted to close, on doctors and nurses who treated patients regardless of how much money they had. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. A silent fury that she had kept contained her entire life began to overflow, but she would not act impulsively. That wasn't what her grandmother had taught her. The right moment, she whispered to herself. Everything has its right moment. She returned to the kitchen, where Sophia, the manager, was waiting for her with a serious expression. Ilara, the Albright gentlemen have asked to speak with you. Specifically, I don't know what you've done, but you better not have ruined anything. Ilara's heart sped up. Had they found out? Had they noticed something in her expression that betrayed she understood? She walked towards the table with firm steps, preparing for whatever came. Maxwell awaited her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sit down, he ordered, pointing to an empty chair. Sir, employees can't, I said. Sit down. Ilara obeyed slowly, feeling the glances of the entire restaurant upon her. This was unusual, completely out of protocol. Maxwell leaned forward, studying her as if she were an insect under a microscope. My son and I have been watching you all night. There's something different about you, something I can't identify. And that bothers me because I always identify people. Ilara didn't respond, just looked him directly in the eyes, something that clearly made him uncomfortable. I'm going to make you an offer, Maxwell continued. I need staff for my restaurants. People who know how to serve, who are discreet, who don't cause problems. I'd pay 3 times what you earn here. It was a trap. Ilara knew it. Men like Maxwell didn't make generous offers without expecting something in return. That's very kind, sir, but I'm fine where I am. Maxwell's smile froze. Nobody said no to him. Pardon? I said I appreciate the offer, but I prefer to stay here. Richard let out an incredulous laugh. Did you hear that, father? The waitress is rejecting your offer. Maxwell narrowed his eyes. I don't think you understand your position, girl. I'm not asking. I'm telling you what you're going to do. And I am telling you, with all due respect, that my answer is no. The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. The nearby diners had stopped talking, observing the scene with a mixture of horror and fascination. Maxwell stood up slowly, his imposing height casting a shadow over Ilara. You're going to regret this. His voice was low, dangerous. Nobody says no to me, especially someone like you. Ilara also stood up, surprising herself with her own audacity. Someone like me, she repeated. And what exactly am I, Mr. Albright? A nobody, a waitress who doesn't know her place in the world. Ilara smiled for the first time all night. She smiled genuinely. You're right about one thing, sir. I am a waitress, but you're wrong about everything else. She turned to leave, but Maxwell's voice stopped here. Du wirst es bereuen, zur Arbeit gekommen zu sein. Ich werde dafür sorgen, dass du nie wieder in dieser Stadt arbeitest. You'll regret having come to work. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. Ilara stopped, her back to him, her heart pounding. The moment had come. She turned slowly, looking him directly in the eyes. And then, in perfect German with an impeccable accent, she replied, Ich verstehe jedes Wort, das Sie heute Nacht gesagt haben, Herr Albright. Jede Beleidigung, jeden Plan. Und ich verspreche Ihnen, der Einzige, der etwas bereuen wird, sind Sie. I understand every word you've said tonight, Mr. Albright. Every insult, every plan. And I promise you, the only one who will regret anything will be you. The expression on Maxwell's face was something Ilara would never forget. The color drained from his face. His eyes widened with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Richard dropped his wine glass, the red liquid spilling over the white tablecloth like blood on snow. Ilara turned and walked towards the kitchen, leaving behind the stunned silence of the city's most exclusive restaurant. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what consequences her actions would have. But for the first time in a long time, she felt free. What she didn't know was that that night was just the beginning, that Maxwell Albright was not the kind of man who accepted being humiliated, and that the war that had just begun would reveal secrets that would change not only her life, but that of everyone involved. Because in that restaurant, under the lights of the crystal chandeliers, a spark had been lit that would soon become a fire, and Ilara Hayes was ready to burn. The kitchen doors closed behind Ilara with a dull thud that resonated like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, much darker one. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her temples, in her wrists, in every corner of her body that trembled with a mixture of adrenaline and terror. What had she done? Arthur was the first to reach her side, taking her by the shoulders with firm hands. "Ilara, what happened out there? The whole restaurant is silent. I've never seen anything like it." I answered him. Ilara's voice came out barely as a whisper. In German, I told him I had understood everything. Arthur's eyes widened. "You answered Maxwell Albright to his face in German." Before Ilara could respond, the kitchen doors opened violently. Sofia Martinez, the manager, entered with her face disfigured by fury and panic. "Ilara, what the hell did you do?" "Mr. Albright is furious. He's demanding to speak with the owners right now." "Sofia, he was humiliating me. He thought I didn't understand, and I don't care what he thought." Sofia interrupted her sharply. "Do you have any idea who that man is? Do you have the slightest idea what he can do to us?" Ilara felt the kitchen walls closing in on her. The other employees looked at her with expressions ranging from compassion to resentment. Some seemed admired by what she had done, but most were just scared. "Sofia," Arthur intervened. "Whatever happened, Ilara is one of our best employees. We can't." "Silence, Arthur. This is none of your business." Sofia turned to Ilara with eyes that exuded coldness. "You're suspended, without pay, until the owners decide what to do with you. Now get out through the back door. I don't want Mr. Albright to see you leave." Ilara felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Suspended, without pay. The words echoed in her mind as she thought about her grandmother's medicine, the outstanding bills, the rent due in days. "Sofia, please, I need this job. My grandmother is sick, and you should have thought of that before deciding to play the hero." Sofia pointed towards the back door. "Out. Now." Ilara looked into Arthur's eyes, hoping to find some support, but he could only lower his gaze helplessly. There was nothing he could do, not against the manager, not against the weight of the Albright name. With trembling hands, Ilara took off her apron and placed it on the stainless steel table. She walked towards the back door, feeling each step as if she were walking towards a cliff. Outside, the alley was dark and smelled of garbage and dampness. Ilara leaned against the brick wall, letting the tears she had held back finally stream down her cheeks. What was she going to do now? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You made a very serious mistake tonight, and mistakes are paid for. Sincerely, someone who will be watching you." A shiver ran down her spine. Maxwell, Richard, someone who worked for them. The message was clearly a threat, but what could they do to her that they hadn't already done? The answer would come sooner than she imagined. Ilara walked through the empty streets towards the bus stop. At that hour, public transportation was scarce, and she had to wait almost 40 minutes in the darkness, constantly looking over her shoulder, feeling that someone was watching her from the shadows. When she finally arrived at her small apartment on the outskirts of the city, she found her grandmother Eleanor awake, sitting in her favorite chair by the window, looking at the distant city lights. "You're home early, my dear." Grandma Eleanor's voice was weak, but warm, as always. "Did something happen?" Ilara knelt beside her grandmother, taking her wrinkled hands in hers. How to tell her the truth? How to explain that she had lost the job that allowed them to survive? "Grandma, I did something tonight. Something I perhaps shouldn't have done." Eleanor's eyes, though tired from illness, shone with that sharp intelligence that age had not managed to extinguish. "Tell me everything, Ilara. Don't leave anything out." And Ilara did. She told her about the Albrights, about the humiliations in German, about the plans to buy the hospital, about her response, and the consequences that followed. When she finished, she expected to see disappointment on her grandmother's face. Instead, she saw pride. "You did well, my dear." Eleanor squeezed Ilara's hands with surprising strength. "You did exactly what you had to do." "But Grandma, I lost the job. I don't know how we're going to." "Listen to me," Eleanor interrupted her firmly. "I spent my whole life staying silent, my whole life being invisible so that people like that Albright could feel superior. I translated for ambassadors, for presidents, for people who governed entire countries, and none of them knew my name. None of them thanked me. None of them saw beyond the woman who served coffee and translated their words." Tears now streamed down both their cheeks. "I don't want that for you, Ilara. I don't want you to live your life in silence. You have a gift that I gave you with all my love, and that gift is not to be hidden. It is to be used, to defend yourself. to defend others who cannot defend themselves. Elara hugged her grandmother, feeling the fragile body under her arms, the bones that protruded where there had once been firm flesh, the heart that beat weakly, but with unyielding determination. "I'm scared, Grandma. That man has power. He can destroy us. Power without honor is just noise, my dear, and noise, no matter how loud, eventually fades." That night, Elara could barely sleep. Her mind went over and over the events of the restaurant, Maxwell's words, the threatening text message, the uncertainty of the future. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the millionaire's face transforming from mockery to fury when she spoke in German. The next day, the reality of her situation became even clearer. When she tried to call the restaurant to speak with Sophia, no one answered. When she went in person, the security guard prevented her from entering, saying she was no longer welcome. "I'm sorry, miss." The guard, an older man who had always treated her well, seemed genuinely sorry. "Orders from above. I can't let you pass. But my things, my last pay. They told me they would send it by mail along with your termination letter." Termination letter? Not just suspended. Fired. Elara walked through the city in a daze. What was she going to do now? She had savings for maybe 2 weeks. After that, she didn't want to think about what came next. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but different from the threat from last night. Elara Hayes. A male voice. Professional. Cold. "Yes, that's me. This is Attorney Daniel Vance, legal counsel for Albright Group. My client wishes to meet with you this afternoon. It is a matter of urgent nature." Elara's heart stopped for a second. "Meet with me? For what? That will be discussed in person. You have 1 hour to present yourself at the corporate offices of Albright Group. The address will be sent to you by message. I strongly suggest you do not miss it." The call cut off before Elara could respond. Minutes later, she received the address, an office building in the financial district. The kind of place where people like her normally only entered to clean floors. Part of her wanted to ignore the summons, but another part, the part her grandmother had raised to never run from problems, knew she had to go. She had to know what they wanted. She had to face whatever came. She changed into the best clothes she had, a simple white blouse, a dark skirt, shoes she had bought at a second-hand store, but which still looked presentable. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and took a deep breath. "I can do this," she whispered. "I can do this." The Albright Group building was a tower of glass and steel that rose into the sky like a monument to the power of money. Elara entered through the revolving doors and found herself in a lobby that was larger than her entire apartment. The receptionist, an impeccably dressed woman with an expression of professional boredom, looked her up and down with that scrutiny Elara knew too well. "May I help you? I have an appointment. My name is Elara Hayes." Something changed in the receptionist's expression. Recognition, curiosity, pity. "Of course, they're waiting for you. 27th floor. The elevators are to your right." The elevator ascended in silence, the numbers changing on the digital screen like a countdown to something inevitable. When the doors opened on the 27th floor, Elara found herself in front of another receptionist, this one even more intimidating than the previous one. "Miss Hayes, this way, please." She was guided down a hallway with walls covered in art that probably cost more than Elara would earn in her entire life. At the end of the hallway was a double dark wooden door. The receptionist knocked gently, and a voice from inside said, "Come in." Maxwell Albright's office was exactly what Elara expected. Enormous, ostentatious, designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread out below like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. And there he was, sitting behind a mahogany desk that looked like an altar to his own ego. Beside him, Richard, with that same contemptuous smile from the night before, and in a corner, a man in a grey suit who must have been the lawyer who had called her. "Miss Hayes." Maxwell didn't stand up, didn't even make a gesture to greet her. "How kind of you to accept our invitation." It didn't seem like an invitation, it seemed like an order. Richard let out a laugh, but his father raised a hand to silence him. Direct. "I like that. Although sincerity can be dangerous when you don't have the power to back it up." Maxwell leaned back in his chair. "But I didn't call you to exchange pleasantries. I called you because we have a problem. And problems, in my experience, have 2 solutions. They are eliminated, or they are controlled." Elara felt a chill, but kept her expression neutral. "And I am a problem for you. You have been since last night. You see, I don't care that you understand German. In fact, it's impressive. But what I do care about is that you heard things you shouldn't have heard." Elara's heart sped up. The plans for the hospital, the business conversations. What else might Maxwell have said, thinking no one understood. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Of course you do." Maxwell leaned forward. "You heard about my plans for St. Jude's Hospital. Plans that are confidential. Plans that could be affected if someone with the wrong contacts found out prematurely. I have no contacts of any kind. I'm just a waitress. You were a waitress," Richard interjected maliciously. "Now you're nothing." "Richard." Silence. Maxwell didn't take his eyes off Elara. "Here's my offer, Miss Hayes. Unique and non-negotiable. You're going to sign a confidentiality agreement. You won't talk to anyone about what you heard last night. In return, you'll receive generous compensation, enough to pay for your grandmother's treatment for a year, and a letter of recommendation that will open doors for you in any restaurant in the city." Elara blinked. How did he know about her grandmother? How did he know about the treatment? "I see you're surprised I know about your grandmother, Eleanor." Maxwell smiled without warmth. "I did my research this morning. I know where you live. I know where she receives treatment. I know how much you owe in medical bills. Knowledge is power, Miss Hayes, and I have a lot of both." The lawyer approached with a folder, placing it on the desk in front of Elara. Inside were a multi-page document and a check. Elara looked at the check. The amount was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Enough to pay for everything. Enough to breathe easy for the first time in years. But something wasn't right. Something in Maxwell's expression. Something in the way Richard looked at her with anticipation, as if they were waiting for her to fall into a trap. "And if I don't sign?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken threats. "If you don't sign," Maxwell spoke slowly, savoring each word, "I'll make your life impossible. You already lost your job at the Gilded Hearth. I can make sure you don't work in any restaurant in this city, in this country, if I set my mind to it. And your grandmother's treatment at St. Jude's, well, let's just say that when I complete my acquisition of the hospital, certain patients might find their beds are no longer available." Elara felt nauseous. It wasn't an offer. It was blackmail, extortion disguised as generosity. "You're threatening me. I'm giving you options. There's a difference." Elara's hands trembled as she looked at the document. The words swam before her eyes. Legal clauses, complicated terms, all designed to silence her permanently. She thought of her grandmother, of her smile when she said she was proud, of her words about not living life in silence. She thought of the voices she had heard Maxwell mention, the people who would be affected if he bought the hospital, the patients who would lose their care, the families who would suffer. She thought of everything she had learned throughout her life, every language, every word, every lesson about dignity and courage, and she made a decision. "No," she said with a firm voice. Maxwell frowned. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not signing this." Richard stood up. "Are you crazy? Do you have any idea what you're rejecting?" "I have a perfect idea." Elara also stood up, looking directly into Maxwell's eyes. "I'm refusing to be bought. I'm refusing to be silenced. And I'm refusing to be part of whatever you people plan to do with that hospital. You're going to regret this." Maxwell's voice was pure ice. "I'm going to destroy you and everything you care about." Elara walked towards the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. "Herr Albright," she said in perfect German, "Sie haben Ihr ganzes Leben lang Menschen wie mich unterdrückt, aber diesmal haben Sie sich mit der falschen Person angelegt. Ich werde nicht schweigen und wenn ich falle, werde ich nicht allein fallen. Mr. Albright, your entire life you have oppressed people like me, but this time you've messed with the wrong person. I will not be silent, and if I fall, I will not fall alone." She walked out of the office without looking back, her heart pounding, her legs barely holding her. She didn't know how she was going to keep that promise. She didn't know what resources she had against a man with the power of Maxwell Albright. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war had officially begun, and Elara Hayes had no intention of losing it. What she didn't know was that that very afternoon, while she was returning home to embrace her grandmother and plan her next move, Maxwell Albright was making a call that would change everything. "I need you to thoroughly investigate that girl," he said into the phone with an icy voice. "I want to know every secret, every weakness, every person she cares about, and when you have everything, we'll destroy her completely." On his computer screen, a photo of Elara, taken by the building's security cameras, glowed, and next to it, a photo of Grandma Eleanor entering St. Jude's Hospital for her weekly treatment. The battle for dignity was about to become a fight for survival. The walk back home was the longest Elara had ever taken in her life. Each step weighed like lead. Each breath was a conscious effort not to collapse in the middle of the street. She had defied a giant, and now that giant was preparing to crush her. When she opened the door to her small apartment, she found something she didn't expect. Her grandmother Eleanor wasn't in her chair by the window. She was standing, leaning on her cane, with an old suitcase open on the bed. "Grandma, what are you doing? You shouldn't be up so long." "I'm looking for something, my dear." Eleanor spoke with a determination Ilara hadn't heard in months. "Something I should have shown you a long time ago." Ilara approached, worried about the effort her grandmother was making. Illness had weakened her body, but it clearly hadn't touched her spirit. "Grandma, please, sit down. Whatever it is, I can look for it." "No, I have to find this myself." Eleanor's wrinkled hands rummaged through the contents of the suitcase. Yellowed papers, old photographs, letters in envelopes worn by time. Finally, her fingers closed around a worn but carefully preserved brown leather folder. "Here it is." Eleanor sank onto the bed, breathing with difficulty. "Sit down, Ilara. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about our family." Ilara obeyed, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and dread. What secrets could her grandmother be hiding? What did it have to do with what was happening now? "Many years ago, before you were born, I worked as a translator for diplomatic families," Eleanor began, her voice transporting her to decades past. "I had no degrees, but I spoke 9 languages. I learned them the same way I taught you, by listening, practicing, living among people from all over the world. I know that, Grandma. What you don't know is who I worked for during the last years of my career as a translator." Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out a black and white photograph. In it appeared a much younger version of herself, elegantly dressed, alongside a man in a suit Ilara didn't recognize. This man was Alistair Albright, Maxwell's father. Ilara felt as if the ground opened beneath her feet. "You worked for the Albrights?" "Yes. For 5 years, I was his personal translator in all international negotiations. Alistair built his empire with my help, translating contracts, closing deals, facilitating communications with partners all over the world." Tears began to form in Eleanor's eyes as she continued. "Alistair was different from his son. He was ambitious, yes, but he had honor. He treated me with respect. He even promised me that when he retired, he would give me a share of the profits from the businesses I had helped build. I had signed documents, legal agreements. And what happened? Alistair died suddenly. A heart attack, they said. And when I went to claim what was rightfully mine, I met Maxwell. He was barely 25 then, but he was already the cruel man you know now." Eleanor pulled another document from the folder. It was a contract with official signatures and seals. "This is the original agreement. Alistair promised me 5% of the Albright Group's profits as compensation for my years of service. But when I showed it to Maxwell, he laughed in my face." Eleanor's voice broke with the memory. "He told me that a domestic employee had no right to anything, that if I tried to claim legally, he would use all his power to destroy me. And he did. He hired lawyers who invalidated the contract, claiming that I had no legal capacity to sign agreements of that nature. They took everything from me, my reputation, my savings, my dignity." Ilara took her grandmother's hands, feeling decades of injustice concentrate in that moment. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed of having been so naive, ashamed of not having been able to defend myself, and fear, Ilara, fear that if you ever crossed paths with the Albrights, they would discover who you were and harm you. But now they know who I am." "Exactly." Eleanor squeezed Ilara's hands tightly. "That's why you need to know the full truth, because there's something else in this folder, something Maxwell doesn't know I have." She pulled out a thick envelope sealed with old wax. "During my years working for Alistair, I translated many documents. Some of them were delicate, businesses that weren't exactly legal, agreements with people who preferred to stay in the shadows." "What kind of business?" "The kind that would destroy the Albright Group's reputation if it came to light. Alistair made me swear I would never reveal what I knew, and I kept my promise as long as he lived. But Maxwell broke all the promises his father made to me, so I no longer have an obligation to keep their secrets." Ilara looked at the envelope as if it contained a bomb. In a sense, it was. "Grandma, are you sure about this? If Maxwell finds out you have this, I don't care what happens to me anymore. Ilara, I'm old, I'm sick, but you have a whole life ahead of you, and I won't let that man take it from you as he took mine." Ilara's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Ilara Hayes. A female voice, professional, but warm. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Clara Evans. I'm a journalist with the Metropolitan Chronicle. I heard about what happened at the Gilded Hearth last night. I'd like to speak with you." Ilara's heart sped up. How had a journalist found out so quickly? How did she get my number? "I have my sources. But that's not what's important. What's important is that I have information about Maxwell Albright that I think will interest you, and I think you have information that interests me. Can we meet? Ilara looked at her grandmother, who had heard the entire conversation. Eleanor nodded slowly. Where and when? Tomorrow, at the Sanctuary Bistro, near Central Plaza, at 10 inches the morning. And Miss Hayes, come alone, and don't tell anyone about this call. The communication cut off. Ilara was left staring at the phone, processing what had just happened. Who was it? Eleanor asked. A journalist. She says she has information about the Albrights. It could be a trap, I know. But it could also be our only chance. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, fears, and possibilities. She read the documents her grandmother had given her, each page revealing a story of corruption, manipulation, and cruelty that spanned decades. But there was something else among the papers, something her grandmother hadn't mentioned directly. A letter written in German addressed to Alistair Albright from a European business partner. The letter spoke of a secret agreement, of money transferred to offshore accounts, of political favors bought and sold. Ilara translated every word, feeling the puzzle begin to take shape. The Albrights hadn't built their empire solely with hard work and business acumen. They had built it on lies, bribes, and the exploitation of people like her grandmother. The next morning, Ilara prepared for the meeting with the journalist. Before leaving, her grandmother stopped her. Take this with you. She handed her a small silver locket. It was your mother's. She also had your courage. Rosalind died young, but she lived without fear. I want you to remember that today. Ilara hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling the fragility of her body, but also the strength of her spirit. I'll be back soon, Grandma. I promise. I know you will, my dear. But if something goes wrong, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I always was, from the day you were born. The Sanctuary Bistro was a modest place on a quiet corner of the city. Small tables, walls decorated with old photographs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee floating in the air. Ilara arrived 10 minutes before the agreed time and chose a table in the corner from where she could see the entrance door. Clara Evans arrived promptly. She was a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to analyze everything around her. She was dressed simply but professionally and carried a leather briefcase worn from use. Miss Hayes, she sat across from Ilara without preamble. Thank you for coming. Before we discuss anything, I need to know how you found out about what happened. Clara smiled slightly. I have a source inside the Gilded Hearth. Someone who witnessed everything that happened that night and who is very tired of seeing how the Albrights treat people. Who? That I cannot reveal. Source protection. But what I can tell you is that it's not the first time Maxwell Albright has humiliated employees in that way. And it's not the first time he's destroyed the life of someone who dared to challenge him. Clara opened her briefcase and took out a folder. I've been investigating Albright Group for 3 years. I have testimonies from unjustly fired ex-employees, from competitors ruined by illegal tactics, from public officials bribed to favor their businesses. But I've never been able to publish anything because every time I get too close, someone threatens me, or my sources disappear. Disappear? Not literally, but suddenly they change their minds, move out of town, decide they don't want to talk anymore. The Albright's power reaches very far. Miss Hayes, farther than you imagine. Ilara thought about the documents her grandmother had given her, about the letters, the contracts, the decades of secrets. Why are you looking for me? Because you did something no one else has done. You confronted him publicly. And not only that, you confronted him in his own language. Literally. That makes you a symbol, and symbols are powerful. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to protect my family. I understand that, but sometimes the best way to protect our family is by exposing those who threaten us. Clara leaned forward. Miss Hayes, I'm preparing a report that could destroy the Albrights, but I need more evidence. Solid evidence they can't disprove or buy. Do you have something like that? Ilara hesitated. Trusting a stranger was risky, but going it alone against the Albrights was suicide. I have documents, she finally said. Documents my grandmother kept for decades. Contracts, letters, agreements that prove illegal activities. Clara's eyes shone with interest. What kind of activities? Bribes, tax evasion, agreements with people who operated outside the law, all translated and documented by my grandmother when she worked for Alistair Albright. My grandmother worked for the Albrights for 5 years, and when Alistair died, Maxwell stripped her of everything that was legally hers. Clara leaned back in her chair, processing the information. This is bigger than I thought. Much bigger. There's something else. Ilara took a deep breath. Maxwell is planning to buy St. Jude's Hospital. He wants to close departments that serve patients without resources. My grandmother receives treatment there. Do you have proof of that? I heard it directly from his mouth in German. He thought no one understood. Clara took a recorder from her briefcase. Would you be willing to give a recorded testimony? To tell everything you know, including about your grandmother? Ilara thought about Eleanor, her tired but proud smile, the decades of silence she had endured, the opportunity to finally get justice. Yes, I'm willing. For the next 2 hours, Ilara spoke, telling everything. The night at the restaurant, the humiliations in German, the meeting at the Albright Group offices, the blackmail, the threats, and then she told her grandmother's story. Every word was like lifting a weight from her soul. When she finished, Clara put away the recorder with a serious but hopeful expression. This is enough to start, but I need to see those original documents. Can you get them for me? I'll have to talk to my grandmother. They're hers, not mine. I understand, but do it soon. The Albrights aren't going to stand still. If they find out we're working together, they'll try to stop us. Ilara nodded, getting up to leave, but before she could take a step, Clara stopped her. One more thing, Miss Hayes. Last night I received an anonymous call. Someone warned me to be careful with you, that you were dangerous, unstable, that nothing you said could be trusted. Ilara's stomach churned. Who called? They didn't leave a name, but I recognized the number. It was from Richard Albright's personal cell phone, so it was him. Richard had been the one who sent the threatening message the night of the restaurant. Richard was trying to discredit her before she could defend herself. And why did you decide to meet with me anyway? Clara smiled. Because in my experience, when someone like Richard Albright tries to destroy a person's reputation before meeting them, it means that person has something they fear. And I want to know what it is. Ilara left the bistro with a mixture of hope and terror. She had an ally, she had a plan, but she also had powerful enemies who were willing to do anything to silence her. As she walked towards the bus stop, her phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Arthur, the chef. Ilara, I need to see you urgently. I found out something about the Albrights that you need to know. It's about your grandmother. Please, come to the restaurant after 11 p.m. when it's closed. Enter through the back door. It's important. Ilara read the message 3 times. What could Arthur know about her grandmother? Why so much urgency and secrecy? Something wasn't right. But at the same time, Arthur had always been kind to her, always protected her. She could trust him. Couldn't she trust anyone? What Ilara didn't know was that at that very moment in the Albright Group offices, Maxwell was receiving the investigation report he had ordered. And what that report contained not only revealed who Ilara Hayes really was, it revealed a secret that connected the 2 families in a way no one would have imagined. A secret that if it came to light, would destroy much more than reputations. It would destroy lives. The clock struck 10:40 p.m. when Ilara got off the bus, 2 blocks from the Gilded Hearth. The streets were almost empty, barely lit by streetlights that cast long shadows over the damp pavement. It had rained during the afternoon, and the air still smelled of wet earth and asphalt. Every step she took towards the restaurant increased the unease in her chest. Arthur's message kept replaying in her head. What could he know about her grandmother? Why so much mystery? Why meet secretly after closing? Before leaving home, Ilara had hesitated. Eleanor noticed her uneasiness. Where are you going at this hour, my dear? Arthur asked me to meet him. He says he has important information. The chef? Eleanor frowned. And why can't he tell you over the phone? I don't know, Grandma, but Arthur has always been good to me. I trust him. Eleanor had looked at her with those eyes that seemed to see beyond words. Be careful, Ilara. In times of war, even friends can inadvertently become enemies. Ilara had promised to be cautious, but now, standing in front of the alley that led to the back door of the restaurant, her grandmother's words echoed like a warning she perhaps should have heeded more carefully. The alley was dark. The only light came from a lamp above the back door that flickered intermittently as if it were about to go out. Ilara walked slowly, her senses alert, her heart beating faster and faster. The door was ajar. Arthur, she called softly, pushing the door open carefully. The kitchen was in shadows. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed faintly under the emergency light that always remained on. Everything was silent. Too silent. Arthur, are you here? A noise to her right made her spin sharply. A figure emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't Arthur. It was Richard Albright. Ilara's heart stopped for a second before beginning to beat with uncontrolled force. She instinctively backed away, but another figure appeared behind her, blocking the exit. Maxwell Albright. Good evening, Miss Hayes. Maxwell's voice was soft, almost kind, which made it even more terrifying. How kind of you to accept our invitation. Where is Arthur? Elara managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. The chef? Richard let out a contemptuous laugh. He's at home, sleeping soundly. He has no idea we used his name to bring you here. The message had been a trap from the beginning. Elara felt nauseous as she realized how easily she had fallen. What do you want from me? Maxwell walked slowly towards her, his shoes echoing on the kitchen floor with each step. What I want, Miss Hayes, is to understand something that has been bothering me since I received a certain report this afternoon. He pulled an envelope from his inner pocket. You see, when I ordered you to be investigated, I expected to find the typical debts, family problems, perhaps some embarrassing secret I could use to pressure you, but what I found was much more interesting. He opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. Did you know that your mother, Rosalind Hayes, worked briefly for my father many years ago? Before you were born, Elara felt as if the ground moved beneath her feet. Her mother, she had never known much about her. Eleanor rarely spoke of Rosalind, and when she did, it was with such deep sadness that Elara had learned not to ask. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, because your grandmother made sure to erase that part of history. Maxwell smiled coldly. Your mother was beautiful, according to the records. Intelligent too. My father hired her as a personal assistant when she was barely 19. Eleanor already worked for us then, translating documents. I suppose it was she who recommended her daughter. What are you getting at? To the truth, Miss Hayes, to the truth your grandmother has hidden from you your entire life. Richard approached from behind, too close for Elara's comfort. She could feel his breath on her neck, his menacing presence. My father was a man of diverse appetites, Maxwell continued, and your mother was young, vulnerable, alone in the world, except for her mother Eleanor. It's not hard to imagine what happened. You're lying. Elara's voice came out louder than she expected. My mother died when I was a baby in an accident. That's what Eleanor told you. Maxwell shook his head with false compassion. How convenient. The truth is much more complicated. Your mother didn't die in an accident, Miss Hayes. Your mother disappeared. She left one night without a trace, leaving you with Eleanor. And the reason she left, well, that has to do directly with my family. Elara felt the world spinning around her. Her mother hadn't died. Eleanor had lied to her her entire life. I don't believe you, she said, though her voice no longer sounded so sure. You don't have to believe me. You can ask your grandmother directly. But before you do, allow me to show you something else. He pulled a photograph from the envelope. It was old, yellowed by time. In it appeared a young woman, beautiful, with eyes Elara recognized immediately because she saw them every day in the mirror, her mother. But she wasn't alone in the photo. Beside her, with his arm around her shoulders, was a man Elara also recognized, Alistair Albright, Maxwell's father. Your mother and my father had a relationship, Miss Hayes, a relationship that lasted almost 2 years, and when it ended, well, let's just say the consequences were permanent. The meaning of his words took a moment to penetrate Elara's mind. When it did, she felt as if her heart had been ripped from her chest. No, she whispered, that's not possible. Not possible. Maxwell chuckled softly. Genetics don't lie. Didn't you ever wonder where your facility for languages came from? Eleanor speaks 9. It's true, but my father spoke 12. He was a linguistic genius, a gift he clearly passed down to you. You're lying, Elara shouted, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. All of this is a lie to manipulate me. Ali? Maxwell pulled out another document. This is a DNA analysis my father ordered more than 20 years ago. He compared his blood with your mother's when she became pregnant. He wanted to be sure before making certain decisions. He showed the paper to Elara. Numbers, percentages, scientific terms she could barely process in her state of shock. According to this analysis, there is a 99.9% probability that Alistair Albright was your biological father, Miss Hayes, which means you and I are siblings. The silence that followed was absolute. Elara couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The world, as she knew it, had collapsed in a matter of minutes. Of course, Maxwell continued in a casual tone. My father never officially recognized you. When he discovered the pregnancy, he offered your mother money to disappear. Rosalind rejected the money, but she still disappeared shortly after you were born. No one knows exactly what happened to her. Some say she fled. Others have darker theories. What did you do to her? Elara finally found her voice, hoarse with tears. What did you do to my mother? I didn't do anything to her. I was a child then, but my father was a man who protected his legacy at any cost. An illegitimate child, especially a daughter, would have been a scandal, a stain on his perfect reputation. Richard spoke for the first time since he had revealed his presence. The irony is that during all these years, my grandfather's illegitimate daughter has been serving tables in restaurants, cleaning houses, surviving on crumbs, while we inherited everything that technically also belongs to you. Shut up, Richard. Maxwell gave him a warning look. We're not here to discuss inheritances. Then what are we here for? Elara asked, wiping away her tears with fury. To torture me with secrets from the past, to watch me break down. We're here to offer you a deal. Maxwell put the documents back in the envelope. Now that you know the truth, you have two options. The first, you keep silent about everything, about what you heard in the restaurant, about the hospital plans, about these documents. In return, I'll make sure your grandmother receives the best medical treatment possible at no cost, and you'll receive a monthly amount that will allow you to live comfortably. And the second option is for you to continue with your little crusade for justice, to talk to journalists, to try to expose me. But if you choose that path, I will not only destroy your life and your grandmother's, I will also make sure the world knows you are an illegitimate Albright who is only after money. I will turn your story of struggle into a story of greed, and believe me, I have the resources to do it. Elara stared at him. This man was her brother. They shared blood, they shared a father, but they shared nothing else. He was everything she despised, everything her grandmother had taught her to reject. Why? She asked softly. Why so much hatred? If what you say is true, we're family. For the first time, something changed in Maxwell's expression. A shadow crossed his face. Something that could have been pain or resentment. Family? My father spent his last years obsessed with you, not with his legitimate children, not with the empire he built, but with the daughter he had abandoned. Before he died, he confessed to me that the biggest mistake of his life was not having acknowledged you, that you were his true heir, not I. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. So don't talk to me about family, Miss Hayes. You stole my father's love without even knowing it, and now you want to steal everything else from me. I don't want anything from you. Elara said firmly, I only want justice for my grandmother, for my mother, for all the people your family has destroyed. Then you chose the second option. Maxwell made a signal, and two men appeared from the shadow's bodyguards by their appearance. Large, intimidating, with empty expressions of professionals accustomed to unpleasant tasks. Escort Miss Hayes home. Make sure she understands the consequences of her decisions. Elara felt panic growing in her chest. What were they going to do to her? What were they going to do to her grandmother? But before the bodyguards could touch her, a voice resonated from the kitchen door. Halt! Police! Nobody move! The lights came on abruptly, momentarily blinding everyone. Elara blinked, trying to understand what was happening. Several officers entered through different doors, weapons in hand, shouting orders, and behind them, with an expression of contained triumph, was Clara Evans. What the hell is this? Maxwell roared. This, Mr. Albright, is the end of your reign. Clara approached with a microphone in her hand. Everything you just said was recorded. Every threat, every confession, every detail about what your family did to Rosalind Hayes. That's illegal. You can't record without my consent. Actually, yes we can. When there is suspicion of criminal activity, authorities can authorize surveillance. And thanks to certain documents we received this morning, we had more than enough suspicion. Maxwell turned towards Elara with murderous fury in his eyes. Did you know this was going to happen? No. Elara shook her head, as surprised as he was. I didn't know anything. She's telling the truth. Clara intervened. Elara didn't know about the operation, but someone else did. Someone who has been waiting years to see justice. From behind the officers emerged a figure that made Elara's heart stop. Grandma Eleanor. Her grandmother walked slowly, leaning on her cane, but with her head held high and her eyes shining with a strength Elara had never seen. Grandma, how? When you left tonight, I knew something was wrong. Eleanor spoke with a clear and firm voice. I called Miss Evans. She contacted the authorities, and together, we prepared this. She approached Maxwell, looking him directly in the eyes without a trace of fear. For 25 years, I kept silent. For 25 years, I carried the pain of losing my daughter because of your father. But tonight I heard everything you said, and now the world will hear it too. Maxwell Albright, for the first time in his life, was speechless. The officers began to handcuff him while he shouted about lawyers and lawsuits. Richard tried to flee but was stopped before reaching the door. Elara ran to her grandmother, hugging her tightly. Grandma, is everything he said about my mother true? About Alistair? Eleanor held her, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "It's true, my dear. It's all true, and the time has come for you to know the whole story." Outside, the sirens of more patrol cars lit up the night. Inside, two women embraced as decades of secrets finally came to light. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time, Elara felt she wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The central police station was an old building that smelled of cold coffee and old papers. Elara was sitting in a waiting room with her grandmother, both wrapped in blankets that a kind officer had offered them. Outside, dawn began to paint the sky with pink and orange hues, but neither of them had slept. Clara Evans had spent the last few hours giving statements, handing over evidence, coordinating with the prosecutors who had arrived urgently when they learned the magnitude of the case. Maxwell and Richard Albright were in separate cells, their lawyers already working frantically to get them bail. But for the moment, they were behind bars, and that was enough. "Grandma," Elara finally broke the silence that had enveloped them for hours. "I need to know everything about my mother, about Alistair, about what really happened." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength from somewhere deep within her soul. When she opened them, there was a mixture of pain and relief Elara had never seen. "Your mother was the light of my life, Elara. Rosalind Hayes had your same smile, your same determination, your same inner fire. When I looked at her, I saw all the good the world could offer." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "I had been working for the Albrights for 3 years. When Rosalind turned 19, she needed a job, and I thought I could protect her if she worked with me. How wrong I was." Elara took her grandmother's hand, feeling the fragile bones under the wrinkled skin. Alistair noticed her from the first day. It was impossible not to notice her. Rosalind had that ability to light up any room she entered. At first, I thought his attentions were simply kindness from an employer to a new employee, but soon I realized it was something more. She loved him. Eleanor sighed deeply. Rosalind believed she loved him, and perhaps, in his own twisted way, Alistair also loved her. But the love of men like him always comes with conditions, with limits, with secrets. She paused, looking towards the window where the rising sun began to filter golden light. When Rosalind discovered she was pregnant, Alistair changed completely. The charming and attentive man became cold, calculating. He offered her money to not have the baby. Rosalind refused. He offered her more money to disappear, to go far away and never contact the Albright family. Rosalind also refused that. What did she want? She wanted Alistair to acknowledge his daughter, to give you his last name, his protection, your rightful place in the world. She was naive, my Rosalind. She thought love could conquer the pride and ambition of a man like him. Tears began to stream down Eleanor's cheeks. Alistair's wife, Genevieve, discovered the truth shortly after you were born. I don't know how she found out, but she did. And Genevieve was a strong-willed woman. She gave Alistair an ultimatum. Either Rosalind disappeared from their lives forever, or she would destroy him publicly, ruin his reputation, his business, everything he had built. And what did he do? He chose his empire over his daughter, over you. He told Rosalind she had to leave, that she could never contact him again, that she could never reveal who her baby's father was. He offered her a considerable amount of money, enough to start a new life in another country. Elara felt a lump in her throat. But you said she refused the money. She did. Rosalind had pride, Elara, too much pride for her own good. She said she wanted nothing from a man capable of abandoning his own blood, that she preferred to raise her daughter in poverty rather than accept crumbs from someone without honor. Eleanor paused, her breathing becoming more difficult. A week after that conversation, Rosalind disappeared. Elara's heart stopped. Disappeared? What do you mean disappeared? Exactly that. One night, after putting you to sleep in your crib, she left the apartment saying she was going to buy milk. She never returned. Did you look for her? I looked for her for years, Elara. I went to the police, hired private investigators with the little money I had. I put up posters all over the city. No one found anything. It was as if the earth had swallowed her. Elara felt that the air wasn't reaching her lungs. Do you think Alistair had something to do with it? Eleanor took a moment to respond. For a long time, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that the man my daughter had fallen in love with was capable of something like that. But over the years, as I watched the Albrights destroy anyone who stood in their way, I began to have doubts. Doubts that became suspicions. Suspicions that became certainty. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted to protect you. Eleanor took Elara's face in her hands. If you had known the truth, you would have looked for the Albrights. You would have demanded answers, and they would have destroyed you, as they destroyed everyone else. I preferred you to believe your mother died in an accident. At least that way you could have peace." "Peace?" Elara stood up abruptly, frustration and pain mixing in her voice. "Do you think I lived in peace believing my mother was dead? Do you think it didn't hurt every holiday without her? Every birthday? Every important moment of my life where she should have been? I know, my dear, I know. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger, braver. I'm sorry for everything." Elara looked at her grandmother, this woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her, who had worked until she was sick to give her a future, who had carried impossible secrets for decades. And despite the pain, despite the betrayal she felt, she couldn't hate her. She knelt in front of her, taking her hands again. "I forgive you, Grandma, but I need to know one more thing. Do you think my mother is still alive?" Eleanor looked at her with eyes full of a hope she had kept hidden for years. "I don't know, Elara, but they never found a body. There was never any proof she was dead. And there's something I never told you because I didn't want to give you false hope." "What?" 5 years ago, I received a letter. No sender, no signature. It just said, "She's fine. Don't look for her." It was written in French. Elara felt a shiver run down her spine. "French? Why in French?" "Rosalind spoke perfect French. I taught her when she was a child, just like I taught you. It was our secret language, the one we used when we didn't want anyone else to understand." "Did you keep the letter?" "It's in the leather folder, along with all the other documents." The door to the room opened, and Clara Evans entered, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Ladies, we have news. The prosecutor has decided to file formal charges against Maxwell and Richard Albright. Extortion, threats, and we are investigating possible connections to the disappearance of Rosalind Hayes." Elara stood up immediately. "You can investigate that? After so many years? There is no statute of limitations for certain crimes, Miss Hayes. And with the recorded confessions from last night, we have enough to reopen your mother's case." Eleanor let out a suppressed sob. "Really? After all this time? Really, madam?" Clara approached, placing a gentle hand on the old woman's shoulder. "But we need your full cooperation. All documents, all letters, everything you have saved. She will have it." Eleanor nodded. "Everything, every paper, every photo, every memory. If that helps find my Rosalind, I will hand it over without hesitation." Clara looked at Elara with a serious expression. "There's something else you should know." During the interrogation, Richard started talking. It seems he wants to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange for information. What kind of information? He says he knows what really happened to Rosalind Hayes. He says his grandfather, Alistair, told him the truth before he died, and that Maxwell also knows, but has never admitted it. The world seemed to stop. Elara felt her knees weaken. "Richard knows where my mother is? We're not sure yet. He could be lying to get a better deal, but the prosecutors are going to interrogate him more thoroughly. If there's any truth to what he says, we'll find it." The following hours were a whirlwind of statements, signatures, legal procedures that Elara barely understood. Eleanor had to be taken to the hospital for a checkup due to the stress of the night, but the doctors confirmed she was stable. While waiting for news in the hospital hallway, Elara received an unexpected call. "Miss Hayes, this is Arthur Peterson. I just heard what happened last night. Are you okay? Chef Arthur?" Elara felt relieved to hear a familiar voice. "Yes, I'm fine. It was a long night. They told me they used my name to set a trap for you. I'm so sorry. If I had known. It's not your fault. You had no way of knowing." There was a pause on the line. "Miss Hayes, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I was scared." "Of what are you talking?" "I knew your mother, Rosalind. We worked together briefly many years ago in another restaurant before she started working for the Albrights." Elara almost dropped the phone. "You knew my mother?" "Yes. She was an extraordinary woman, kind, intelligent, full of life. When I knew who you were, when I saw you for the first time at the Gilded Hearth, I almost couldn't believe it. You're identical to her, Miss Hayes. Identical. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because Rosalind made me promise that if I ever met her daughter, I wouldn't tell her anything until the time was right. She told me that someday, when you were ready, the truth would come out, and that when that happened, I would have to tell you something important." Elara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What? Not over the phone. I need to see you in person. You can come to the restaurant tomorrow morning before it opens. There's something your mother left for you. Something I've kept for over 20 years. My mother left something for me?" "Yes, and I think it's the key to finding her." The call ended, leaving Elara with more questions than answers. What had her mother left her? How could Arthur have kept such a secret for so long? And why had Rosalind trusted him that night? As Eleanor slept in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped softly. Ilara stayed awake, looking out the window. The city sparkled with thousands of lights, each representing a life, a story, a secret. Somewhere in that world, perhaps her mother still existed. Perhaps she had spent all these years hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. Or perhaps the letter had been a cruel joke, a false hope designed to torment. It didn't matter. Ilara would find the truth. No matter the cost. Her phone vibrated with a message from Clara. Richard talked. He says Rosalind didn't die. He says Alistair sent her away to Europe with a new identity. He says there's proof in a safety deposit box that only Maxwell can open. Tomorrow we'll try to get a warrant. This isn't over, Ilara. It's just beginning. Ilara read the message 3 times, letting the words sink into her mind. Her mother was alive, or at least had been alive, when Alistair sent her away. Europe, a new identity, a safety deposit box with proof, and Arthur had something her mother had left her, something he had kept for over 2 decades waiting for this moment. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit, but the complete picture was still blurry, incomplete, full of shadows and mysteries. Ilara looked at her sleeping grandmother, this woman who had sacrificed everything for her, who had carried impossible secrets to protect her. "I'm going to find her, Grandma," she whispered in the darkness. "I'm going to find Mom, I promise." Outside, the night continued its course, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding under its blanket of stars. But inside Ilara, something had changed permanently. She was no longer just a waitress fighting to survive. She was a daughter looking for her mother, a granddaughter honoring her grandmother's sacrifice, a woman reclaiming her truth, and nothing and no one was going to stop her, not even the ghosts of the past yet to be discovered. Because in the Albright's safety deposit box awaited secrets no one had imagined. Secrets that would not only change Ilara's life, they would change everything she thought she knew about her family, about the Albrights, and about the night Rosalind Hayes disappeared forever. The sun was barely beginning to rise when Ilara arrived at the Gilded Hearth. The restaurant looked different in the dawn light, stripped of its glamour, revealing the cracks in the walls and the wear of the years, as if the building itself knew it no longer had to feign perfection. Arthur awaited her at the back door, the same place where days ago her nightmare had begun. But this time the chef had a different expression. It wasn't worry or fear. It was something Ilara couldn't fully identify. Nostalgia, anticipation, guilt. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hayes." His voice was softer than usual. "I know that after everything that happened here, this place must bring back bad memories. Memories don't scare me, chef. What scares me is not knowing the truth." Arthur nodded slowly and led her inside. They walked through the empty kitchen to a small room in the back that Ilara had never noticed. It was barely a storage closet filled with dusty boxes and old utensils. "I worked here for 32 years, Arthur spoke as he moved boxes. "Long before the Albrights bought this place. Long before you were born." He stopped in front of a rusty metal box, hidden behind sacks of flour. "When I met your mother, I was just a kitchen helper. Rosalind sometimes came with Eleanor while she did translations for a businessman who dined here regularly. Your mother was extraordinary. She had that light that some people possess, that ability to make everyone around her feel special. Were you close?" "We were friends, good friends. Rosalind had no one else but Eleanor, and I was alone in the world too. We understood each other." Arthur opened the metal box with a small key he wore around his neck. Inside was a package wrapped in yellowed cloth, worn by the passage of time. "The night before Rosalind disappeared, she came to see me. She was scared, but also determined. She told me she had to leave, that she couldn't explain why, but that she needed to ask me a favor." Arthur's hands trembled as he unwrapped the package. "She gave me this. She made me swear I would keep it until her daughter was ready to receive it. She told me, when Ilara is strong, when the world can no longer ignore her, then she will know it is time." Inside the package were 3 objects: a letter sealed with red wax, a small photograph, and a passport. Ilara took the photograph first. In it, Rosalind appeared, clearly pregnant, smiling at the camera with one hand on her belly. On the back of the photo, in elegant handwriting, was written, "For my Ilara, the day I knew you would be my greatest gift." Tears began to fall before Ilara could stop them. "The passport," Arthur pointed to the document. "Look at it." Ilara opened it with trembling hands. It was a French passport, and the name that appeared was not Rosalind Hayes. It was Marie Logan. "Your mother had a false identity," Arthur explained. "She had obtained it months before she disappeared. I think she was planning to flee, to start a new life away from the Albrights. But then, if she had everything ready, Why didn't she take me with her? That, Miss Hayes, I think the letter explains. Elara looked at the sealed envelope. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold it. Her whole life, all the unanswered questions, all the voids in her heart. Perhaps the answers were there on that yellowed paper, waiting to be read. She broke the seal carefully, as if the envelope might disintegrate at any moment. Inside were several pages written in her mother's handwriting, the same handwriting she had seen in the letter Eleanor kept, Rosalind's handwriting. Elara began to read aloud, needing to hear her mother's words filling the silence. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. It means you are strong, you are brave, you are everything I always knew you would be. There are so many things I wish I could have told you in person. So many hugs I wish I could have given you. So many nights I wish I could have been there to comfort you when you cried. But life forced me to choose. And I chose your safety over my happiness. Alistair Albright is your father. I don't know if you already know that when you read this, but I need you to understand it from my perspective. I loved him, Elara. I loved him with all my naive heart. And he, in his own twisted way, loved me too. But the love of men like him always has limits, and those limits are power and money. When I became pregnant, Alistair offered me money to disappear. I refused. I wanted him to acknowledge you, to give you your place. I was foolish to think his love was stronger than his ambition. Then his wife Genevieve discovered everything, and she was not like Alistair. She was dangerous. She threatened me directly. She told me that if I didn't disappear, she would make sure something bad happened to you, to my baby, to my Elara. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't put you in danger, so I made a deal. I would leave, disappear forever. In return, Genevieve promised that they would never touch you, that they would let you live in peace with your grandmother. Alistair accepted the deal, but with a condition. I couldn't take you with me. He said you were his blood, that he wouldn't allow his daughter to grow up in poverty in some foreign country. It was the hardest decision of my life, Elara. Leaving you was like ripping my heart from my chest, but I did it because I loved you more than my own life. I left you with Eleanor because I knew she would raise you with love, with values, with the strength I couldn't give you directly. I went to France, took a new identity, built a new life, but never, not a single day, did I stop thinking about you. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped dreaming of the moment I could see you again. Years ago, when I heard Alistair had died, I thought about returning. But Maxwell already controlled everything, and he was worse than his father, crueler, more ruthless. I was afraid of what he might do to you if I appeared. So I waited. I waited for you to be strong enough to face them. I waited for the world to see who you really are. And if you are reading this, it means that moment has arrived. Elara, my love, my life, my reason for existing. I am alive. I have been alive all these years waiting for you. And if you want to find me, if you want to know me, if you can forgive me for leaving you, there is a place in Paris, a small café in Montmartre, called the Quiet Corner Café. I go there every Sunday morning, and have for 20 years. I always order the same thing, coffee with milk and a croissant. I always sit at the same table by the window, and I always look towards the door, waiting for the day my daughter walks through it. I love you, Elara. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I will love you until the last breath of my life. Your mother, Rosalind. Elara finished reading, and the silence that followed was absolute. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably, falling onto the paper, mixing with words that had waited over 2 decades to be read. Arthur cried too, openly, without trying to hide it. She's alive, Elara whispered. My mother is alive. She always was, Miss Hayes, waiting for you, loving you from afar. Elara hugged the letter to her chest, feeling as if her mother's arms were embracing her across time and distance. At that moment, her phone rang. It was Clara. Elara, we have the warrant. They opened the Albright safety deposit box and found something you need to see urgently. Something about your mother. Something Maxwell hid for years. Elara looked at Arthur, then the letter, then the passport with the name Marie Logan. I'm on my way. Because her mother's letter had answered many questions, but what awaited in that safety deposit box would reveal that Rosalind Hayes' story was much more complex than anyone had imagined, and that Elara's journey was just beginning. The Albright safety deposit box contained decades of secrets, documents of bribes, illegal contracts, evidence of shady dealings that would shake any corporate empire. But none of that mattered to Elara at that moment. What mattered was a manila envelope with her name written on it in handwriting she would now recognize anywhere. Her mother's handwriting. Clara handed it to her with careful hands. Maxwell stored it here years ago. Apparently, Rosalind sent this letter to Alistair shortly before he died, asking him to give it to her daughter. He never did, and Maxwell decided to bury it along with all the other secrets of his family. Ilara opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet and a recent photograph. In the image appeared a woman with graying hair, bright eyes, and a smile that was exactly like hers. Rosalind, her mother, alive, real, waiting for her. The letter was brief. My Ilara, if you ever read this, I want you to know that I never stopped fighting for you. Every year on your birthday, I sent letters to your father asking him to give them to you. He never did, but I keep waiting. I will always wait. The Quiet Corner Cafe every Sunday until my heart stops beating. I love you, Mom. Ilara looked at Clara, then at Arthur, who had arrived with her, and finally made a decision that would change her life forever. I need to go to Paris. The flight lasted hours that seemed like eternities. Eleanor couldn't travel due to her health condition, but she insisted that Ilara go. Go, my dear. She had told her at the hospital, holding her hands tightly. Go find my Rosalind. Tell her I forgive her. Tell her I never stopped loving her. And bring her back home. Clara took care of everything. The tickets, the hotel, the contacts in France who would help if anything went wrong. The report on the Albrights could wait. This was more important. It was Sunday when Ilara arrived in Montmartre. The cobblestone streets glistened under a spring sun. Artists painted on the corners. Musicians played melodies that floated in the air like promises. And there, on a narrow street, was the cafe her mother had mentioned. The Quiet Corner Cafe, the refuge of souls. Ilara stopped in front of the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone around her could hear it. What if her mother wasn't there? What if she had stopped going? What if after so many years, she no longer wanted to be found? But then she remembered Eleanor's words. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. She pushed the door open and entered. The cafe was small, cozy, with walls covered in old photographs and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling every corner. There were few people at that early hour. A young couple in a corner, an old man reading the newspaper, and by the window, at a table for two, a silver-haired woman gazed out at the street with the expression of someone who had waited her entire life. Ilara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but look at that woman who was her mother, who had sacrificed everything to protect her, who had spent over 2 decades waiting for this moment. Then, Rosalind turned her head, their eyes met, and the world stood still. Rosalind clutched a hand to her chest, as if her heart threatened to burst out. Her lips trembled, forming a word that didn't quite make it out. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she slowly stood up, not taking her eyes off Ilara. Ilara, her voice was barely a whisper. My Ilara. Mom. That single word broke the dam that held back decades of pain, of absence, of unexpressed love. Rosalind ran to her daughter and enveloped her in a hug that seemed to want to recover all the lost hugs, all the goodnight kisses, all the tears she couldn't wipe away. My baby, Rosalind sobbed. My beautiful baby. You finally came. You came. Ilara cried too, clinging to her mother as if she feared she would disappear again. I found you. Mom, I found you. They remained embraced for minutes that felt like hours, while the other customers in the cafe watched, moved, not fully understanding what they were witnessing, but sensing the magnitude of the moment. When they finally separated, Rosalind took Ilara's face in her hands, studying every detail as if she wanted to memorize every line, every expression. You're beautiful, she whispered, more beautiful than I ever imagined. And those eyes. You have my eyes. And your smile. From Grandma Eleanor. How is my mother? She's waiting for you. She's sick, but she's fighting. She wants to see you, Mom. She wants you to come home. Rosalind closed her eyes, new tears escaping. Can she forgive me? After I abandoned her, she forgave you a long time ago. She just wants to hug you one more time. They sat together at the table by the window, the same table where Rosalind had waited for 20 years. And they talked. They talked for hours, sharing stories, filling voids, building bridges over the chasm of time that had separated them. Rosalind told about her life in Paris, how she had worked as a translator using the languages Eleanor had taught her, how she had built a small but dignified life, how every Sunday she came to this cafe hoping to see her daughter walk through that door. Ilara told about her life, about Eleanor raising her with unyielding love, about learning 7 languages by listening to her grandmother, about working as a waitress, being humiliated, and finally finding her voice. You answered in German? Rosalind laughed through tears when Ilara told the story. Of course you did. You're my daughter, and Eleanor's granddaughter, the 2 strongest women I know. When the sun began to set over Paris, Painting the sky with golden and pink hues, Rosalind took Ilara's hands. "And now what? Now you come home with me. Grandma needs you. I need you. There's no one left to hide from, Mom. The Albrights are finished. Maxwell and Richard will face justice for everything they did. And you deserve to get your life back." Rosalind looked out the window at the city streets that had been her refuge for so long. "I spent over 20 years running, Ilara, hiding, living half a life, because the other half of my heart was with you. Can I really come back? Can I really start over? Not start over, Mom. Continue. Continue from where we were unjustly separated. Continue being a family." Weeks later, at the city airport, Eleanor waited in a wheelchair, surrounded by Clara, Arthur, and the medical team who had insisted on accompanying her. When the international arrivals gates opened and Ilara appeared, holding the arm of a silver-haired woman, the cry that escaped Eleanor was purely animal, the sound of a mother finding her lost daughter. Rosalind ran to her, kneeling in front of the wheelchair, taking her mother's hands. "Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for leaving you. Forgive me for everything." Eleanor hugged her with the little strength she had left, but with all the love she had saved for decades. "There's nothing to forgive, my dear. You're here. You're alive. That's all that matters." Ilara watched the scene, tears streaming down her cheeks. 3 generations of Hayes women finally reunited. 3 women who had survived impossible losses, terrible injustices, and cruel separations, but who had never, ever stopped loving each other. Clara published her report weeks later. The story of the Albrights and their fall was national news for months. Maxwell and Richard were convicted on multiple charges, losing not only their freedom, but the entire empire they had built on lies and cruelty. Street. Jude's hospital was saved thanks to a coalition of ethical investors that Clara helped gather. Eleanor was able to continue her treatment without worries, now surrounded by her daughter and granddaughter. Ilara received job offers from international translation agencies, prestigious universities, and humanitarian organizations that wanted to leverage her gift for languages, but she chose something different. She founded a free language school for underprivileged youth, teaching in the same way Eleanor had taught her, with patience, with love, with the certainty that knowledge is the most powerful weapon against injustice. She called it the Rosalind Eleanor Hayes School. One spring afternoon, Ilara was sitting in the garden of her new home, watching her mother and grandmother converse under the shade of a tree. Eleanor laughed at something Rosalind said, a sound Ilara thought she would never hear. Rosalind noticed her gaze and smiled, extending a hand towards her. "Come here, my dear. Sit with us." Ilara joined them, sitting on the grass between the 2 women she loved most in the world. "Do you know what I learned from all this?" she said softly. "What, my love?" Eleanor asked. "That the most important language is not German, nor French, nor any of the 7 I speak. The most important language is love, and that I learned from you too." Rosalind and Eleanor exchanged a glance, their eyes shining with tears of happiness. "And you speak it perfectly, my dear." Rosalind kissed her forehead. "You speak it perfectly." The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky with the same golden and pink hues Ilara had seen in Paris the day she found her mother. But now those colors had a different meaning. They were no longer the end of a day. They were the beginning of a new life. A life where 3 women the world had tried to separate were finally together. A life where truth had triumphed over lies. A life where love had conquered power. And that life, Ilara knew with absolute certainty, was the best ending she could have ever imagined. Because it wasn't really an ending, it was the beginning of everything it was always meant to be.